sentence, let's begin by defining what a layer 2 is at its most basic level. Dan, you're welcome to start.
All right, in one sentence.
In one sentence.
A layer 2 in one sentence is a system for utilizing the block space of a blockchain more efficiently without sacrificing on security or decentralization.
All right.
All right, Kelvin, take a shot at it. You will have an opportunity to describe it in more than one.
I would say that the ELI 5 is that it's like a baby blockchain inside of another blockchain, but it has to be inside of another blockchain. It can't be separate.
Very nice. So now in a few more sentences, how does Optimism and Arbitrum attack this particular problem? So yes, you're welcome to start.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess this could be a long answer, but I'll try to keep it short. But there's sort of a broad design space of things that get categorized as layer 2. Can everyone hear me okay? This is my... Cool. Too loud? Okay. There's a broad design space of things that get classified as layer 2. Like basically, some people will call things layer 2 if you're just like not using layer 1. We can sort of like narrow that into, again, the things that try to preserve the sort of trustless properties or the decentralization properties of their underlying layer. Yeah, I mean, from there, so I can talk about Arbitrum. Basically, the model is we are trying to sort of recreate the experience of Ethereum as much as possible, but on the second layer. The way that's done, I guess the briefest way to explain it is we sort of use layer 1 for data availability, and also for like enforcing correctness if need be, but hopefully need never be. The need never comes. So you kind of use layer 1 for data availability and use layer 2 for execution, and that's kind of the optimistic rollup model. I can leave it at that. Yeah.
Cool.
Kelvin.
Yeah. I think a few months ago, Optimism and Arbitrum were probably much more different systems than they are today. At a high level, what you can kind of think about both of these systems as like little Ethereums inside of Ethereum, right? And we have this fundamental definition. We say, as a layer 2, we trust Ethereum. Ethereum is, our Lord and Savior. We're just going to trust it. But the relationship doesn't work the other way around, right? So Ethereum doesn't necessarily trust what's coming out of our system. And so sort of to get this, it's kind of useless if you can only go in one direction. You want to have this kind of communication between the two systems. So this is where this whole optimistic rollup thing comes in, where you have this, this mechanism by which you can sort of make statements about the state of the system on layer 2 and then have layer 1 be confident. I think both systems today, follow the same general approach to getting to this, where you have these interesting interactive proof constructions. You could go into so much detail about every little discrepancy. I think it's much easier to think about the difference between something like an optimistic rollup and a ZK rollup. That difference is more pronounced. Within the optimistic rollup space, I think people are kind of coming to the same general conclusions of how to build these things.
Yeah, like you said, there'd be more to unpack with the differences as of a few months ago or something like that. But now they're converging enough that going through the differences would probably be too wonky. At least like the sort of lower level technical differences. But yeah, the sort of like the other big, if you look at the L2 ecosystem, the other big sort of design pattern is ZK rollups, as you say, which sort of use this cryptographic magic to prove validity. And then like zooming out a little, although they've sort of fallen out of favor, was the sort of plasma design space, which doesn't rely on layer 1 for data availability, but still tries to preserve trustlessness. And I think like the key thing that's happened there, and what's maybe also happening with ZK rollups, which we can talk more about, where optimistic rollup stands out is at the very least, like supporting smart contracts is more having general smart contract support, general EVM support is, if nothing else, more straightforward. There's no unsolved problems there, like we're on mainnet now, we're on mainnet beta, like it works, you can see the code. So this is sort of maybe the easiest way to get to smart contracts on layer 2. Is that fair?
Yeah, fully agree.
Awesome. So now an end user question. Many end users don't really care about how transactions are validated, only that they happen quickly, safely, and cheaply. Does the Web3 industry need to do a better job of educating end users, or is this a design issue where the technologists should just sort it out and then the market will sort itself out? You can go in either or. Kelvin, you want to start there?
Okay, sure. Yeah, this is really complicated, right? Security is not a black and white thing. You have so many different layers of things that you need to be taken care of if you want to be 100% perfectly secure in any of these systems. And a lot of these things are non-obvious to like you're just not going to be able to explain some of these things to users in a way that they're actually going to listen to it. So I mean, it can be frustrating, if you're like, well, why are you just using this sidechain that has one validator on it, or what's the difference between that and using Ethereum? It's a lot of people don't care, but I think that we can still do projects like L2Beat can kind of make it easier for people to compare their options and come to conclusions. I think there is a certain extent to which you're fighting against the tide when you're trying to just educate people about these really, really low-level technical things. But we have to make a best effort to at least come up with some standards around how do we present the general security of these systems and make people feel comfortable. It's hard. It's
hard.
It's difficult.
L2Beat is great. I can sign off on that as well. So that's a really good place to start if you want to understand at least this aspect of the L2 Ethereum ecosystem. Generally, what's tricky about this is this thing that was sort of in your question of who do users care about decentralization or security, and you'll hear people say that users don't care, they just want to do X, and it's hard to respond to that because it's partially true in many cases, but it's also true that there's sort of two categories of users who don't care. There's the ones who should care and the ones who shouldn't, and I think that's to me the parts where it's hard to educate, but where it's important to is where a user doesn't realize that they're taking on some sort of security risk, or that their funds are literally at risk, for example. If they're not aware of that, and there's a blatant risk that they get rugged or something, then probably they should be aware. And if you inform them, they would say, "Oh yes, I wish I knew that." So that's kind of the job of educating. But with that said, it's that there certainly are, and I think you were sort of getting at this. There are plenty of cases where maybe you don't need full Ethereum security or full rollup level security, and I'm comfortable saying that. And it will sort of just always be the case that you'll be able to do smart contract-y things in some places for very low fees. Mm-hmm. On L1s and L2s, there'll always be some out there that are just willing to make that trade-off of we're just going to make it very, very hard to validate this chain, but hey, lower fees. And for a certain type of user and even certain types of developers, if they just want to launch on that, you sort of can't tell them they're wrong. So yeah, you sort of have to zero in on what these things are being used for and communicate that, yeah, if you really want sort of maximum level trustlessness and security and so on,
yes,
layer 2s are where you can go for that.
Maybe this covers a little bit, but end users are definitely one thing to consider when building out dApps, but what do developers mainly look at when they need to weigh where and how to build and deploy apps? What are they really focused on? Let's go with Dan.
Yeah, I'll start. One thing that, it's definitely relevant to both Arbitrum and Optimism that I know we both think a lot about is Ethereum compatibility, where, there just is this very, very strong network effect with the EVM, not, on the sort of smart contract level, but also on the infrastructure level, dev tooling level. So one thing that I sort of underappreciated, and that I keep appreciating more and more is how, again, just being able to provide the full experience, the closest thing as possible to the experience of using Ethereum on layer 2 is really important to a lot of developers, and even slight discrepancies become pain points. How that, whether that remains the case for good, whether, that's long-term what things look like, we'll see. But for now, that's something developers really want. So that's one thing. I think beyond that, developers want to know that there's an ecosystem that they're building around. So being on an Ethereum L2, you kind of have access to all of the Ethereum state, at least you have trustless access to it, if not synchronous access. But then also within the L2, within something like Arbitrum, they want to see that there's there's activity there. There's stuff that they can compose with. And then, of course, some developers also care a lot about security. So there's definitely some projects that like want to really grill us on that. There's other projects that don't care, but yeah.
Yeah, Kelvin, what do you think?
I mean, first, I'll 100% agree with just the ubiquity of the EVM right now. It's like you can't, any minor discrepancy with the EVM that you make, you create a huge headache for yourself. And I mean, we learned that kind of the hard way, and then we just had this moment where we were like, well, we're gonna have to change this whole thing, and we did, just to maintain like as close to something that behaves functionally as close to the EVM as we possibly could. And I would challenge anyone to try to build something that doesn't do that, and they will experience the pain of doing it. The other side of this is that I think that, if you use this like city analogy of what these blockchains look like, people are kind of hoping that like these L2s are actually going to do things in the future that are sort of more interesting than what they are today. Because like L2s today, they're kind of just like Ethereum plus, right? They're essentially very close to Ethereum, but like Ethereum still needs a lot of work to be done. There's a ton of effort that we have to go through over the next couple of years to just take these systems and evolve them into like the next gen blockchain platform. And I think that when people are looking at these systems, they also kind of have to think like, if I'm going to move my application to one of these L2s because I think it's going to be cheaper, you kind of need to follow through with the promise like, A, it's going to be cheaper, it's going to stay cheaper, and B, we're going to keep working on it so that in the future it still stays cheaper and your applications keep working, and you kind of have faith that you aren't making a mistake by deploying your application. Because it's ultimately, there's a huge overhead to deploying an application on Ethereum. Some of this you can solve with tooling, but like there is an overhead to deploying an application to another chain if you already have an application on Ethereum. And so you kind of have to just believe that it's going to be worth it. That's not just going to be more of a headache than it's worth. So there's sort of a social layer that these layer 2s have to create that makes people comfortable and feel like there's a developer ecosystem. This thing is going to continue to evolve in a positive way. Forward.
You mentioned that some of it can be solved with tooling. Do you want to take this chance to show some of your new tooling?
Yeah.
It's up to you.
I'll take 30 seconds.
It's pretty cool.
Chug splash. Let's go. Well, okay. Anyway,
and we can put you on.
Smart contract deployment is really awful today, and I'm trying to build a better smart contract deployment tool that will let you do like multi-chain deployments and all this stuff. But some of this can definitely be mitigated. If we're thinking about just the cost of deploying to a layer 2, if you already have another application, the existing developer tooling just wasn't built to have these multi-chain deployments, to make it easy to view all these deployments. And I mean, we can talk about the UX more later because it's an interesting feature, but we're slowly getting there. The developer experience is improving, the user experience is improving. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you touched on this a bit, but like ETH2 is progressing to provide an L1 scaling solution to the core Ethereum blockchain. Is the upcoming scaling solution a threat to L2 solutions, or is there a place where you both can coexist and both scale? Personally, very, very interested in hearing the answer to this. If you want to take it away.
I mean, this one's fairly.
This is not going to be controversial.
Yeah, this one's fairly easy actually. I mean, at this
go.
point, if that ever, I don't know if that ever, there may have been a point when that seemed like it was more of a competition, but at this point, the way like the ETH2 plan and roadmap has evolved, like rollups are they're pretty integral to what Ethereum's going to look like. So the thinking now is that ETH2, the sort of let's back up a few steps. So like with ETH2 is going to provide sharding, and that's always been a part of it. And this has to do with like very generally sharding has to do with moving away from the model where L1 does everything in a global synchronous environment to splitting up L1 between like more localized asynchronous environments. And initially, there was at least some vague talk about all of these environments having their own execution. Now the thing is like what we're actually going to be sharding is data availability. And I guess the vision is that the current execution environment that is Ethereum will get like merged in via this thing called the merge. and that'll just be global execution within ETH2. You have sharded data, and then like the way you get sharded execution is on layer 2. So that's kind of the outline. Is like, yeah, this is a fundamental and integral part of scaling Ethereum. Is that users will be using rollups. So yeah, definitely not. There's no competitive tension there.
That's good. Kelvin, do you care to elaborate?
I mean, no contest to that answer. Yeah, I mean, there's always been a few ideas of where ETH2 would go, and it's evolved over the years, but it seems like it's kind of solidified that it's, you're going to have this proof of stake thing, and you're going to have these sharded chains that are essentially just ways to come to consensus over more data, and rollups kind of are just, like the bottleneck for most rollups today is the cost of data, and so it just kind of goes very much hand in hand. Data gets cheaper, more rollups get cheaper, and these rollups kind of become what people used to think of as the execution environments on ETH2. Now the rollups are kind of those execution environments instead.
Yeah, and I think it's all the more reason actually that going back a question or two ago into like kind of EVM compatible rollups versus other types. There's other projects, not Arbitrum or Optimism, that are sort of experimenting with other data models, which I think is really cool, either application specific stuff or different execution models where you can like parallelize and do fancy stuff like that. And that's all well and good, and all for there being a variety of options. But I think like clearly it's important that we can continue doing EVM stuff even after the merge. So yeah, that's like even if you think the EVM can be improved upon, or if you think it shouldn't be like the gold standard long term, we still want to be able to like write things in Solidity and understand what they do. So yeah, so here we are.
Here we are. So Ethereum isn't the only blockchain that has expressed a need for scaling solutions. For example, BSC has put it out there that they're interested in a scaling solution. So do you guys think it's going to be a common theme with different blockchains to continuously upgrade to L2 solutions? Or is it just only Ethereum?
I mean,
Kelvin?
I would say I would think it's extremely unlikely that something like Polygon turns into a layer 2. Like they're very clearly investing in layer 2s. I mean, just look at who they're buying.
They're taking over.
Yeah, so I mean, but people expect Polygon to behave a certain way, so it's probably going to stay, stay the L1 that it is. But yeah, you will absolutely see these systems, rollups pop up on these systems. The code that we write is not only written for Ethereum. If you have like an EVM compatible, L1, and you look at something like Polygon and Binance Smart Chain, which are basically just running Geth, you just deploy the same thing over there, and it kind of just, if your code is good enough, ideally it just works on all these different systems. So totally expect layer 2s to pop up on all of these different networks.
Yeah, I do agree that Polygon's an L1. You slipped that in there, but I just want to say that, yes. Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that BSC was talking about doing layer 2s. I missed that. It's pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I know Solana's been signaling that they're like interested in this as well. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think it makes sense. Again, it's like a strict improvement if you can, have these kind of like opt-in environments where you can do things cheaper. There's no reason not to. It is. I just say it's funny because I mean, Solana in particular. It seemed like initially a lot of their narrative is like they're not going to do anything like this. They have like a podcast called No Sharding, I think. So it's a funny twist. And honestly, like if they ask me for advice, which they have not and they won't, but I would almost say like just I saw Anatoly, I think is his name, like the creator of Solana. When I saw him talking about this, I almost like what I would tell him is like do the opposite. Just say like, we're not doing layer 2s, we're not doing anything like sharding. We're going to lean in heavily into like single layer 1, one synchronous thread, and we're just going to optimize everything in that direction. Like, in other words, there may as well be some chain or some community that goes in that direction, and it seems like they positioned themselves to try that. I don't think that would go well, but like they may as well be the ones to do it. I don't know. So it's a bit of mixed messaging, I guess I would say. But yeah,
Fair enough.
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
It's hard though, right? There's like a lot of core infrastructure that you need on the layer 1 first before you can do all this layer 2 stuff. So I think it's reasonable that if you're building out one of these systems, I think both of us have probably thought about this, like the crazy idea of like, what if you put a rollup inside of a rollup? Like, oh my God. And then you realize like, oh yeah, you could do that, maybe 5 years from now, when you feel like everything is really done and it's super hardened and like everything is beautiful and perfect and all the infrastructure is it's been running for years, and then you can start working on throwing a rollup on it. And so I think it's easier for something like Polygon and Binance Smart Chain, where like, as something that's just running Geth, you basically get all these infrastructure providers for free. But I could imagine it being difficult for something like Solana.
Yeah.
If you still need time to harden that core base layer.
Yeah, it should be possible in principle. But yeah, as you say, like those little details of like, the tooling's not there yet or the infrastructure's not there yet end up adding like, I don't know, years. So yeah, so there's that.
Very interesting. I was like, what does a roll-up inside of a roll-up look like? Just very high functioning. What would you call a roll-up inside a roll-up?
L2 squared.
Quadratic.
So we touched on the EVM, Ethereum virtual machine earlier, but it's become the standard in Web3. But at the same time, that comes with the culprit of high gas fees, it's very slow, transaction times. How do layer 2 applications approach solving this bottleneck?
I mean, there's sort of two, so I think like being very EVM, let's say very EVM compatible, sort of a double-edged sword. It's positive for all the reasons we talked about, which is like we capture this network effect. It's negative because like now, whatever downsides of the EVM has, we kind of inherit by default. So I think like that is important to understand, and this is that it's not as though, just like putting something inside of a rollup doesn't make all of its problems go away. So if we're still doing something very close to the EVM, the same stuff that we have to deal with on layer 1, state bloat, et cetera, you're just dealing with that in this other little environment. So that's, that is, I would say, that is one of the downsides of like full EVM support, like Arbitrum and Optimism, and one of the benefits that some of these other designs, they can experiment more freely, I guess. With that said, one of the general cool things about layer 2 is it's like a chance to experiment a bit. Again, we're sort of capped at how much we want to diverge from the EVM, but we've already, like on Arbitrum, we were able to, before EIP 1559 went live, I assume everyone like knows what these terms mean, but just, I don't know, shout out if you don't. But even before that went live, within Arbitrum, we were able to like experiment with a fee model that was basically that or something very similar, right? And I'm all for things like that to continue happening on layer 2 as some of these more kind of experimental ideas, stateless clients, state rent, and things like that. We can kind of like test drive them on layer 2, which I think is cool. But yeah, I think it'll be less like it'll be less of these EVM, hard EVM compatible layer 2s are solving these problems of the EVM, and more like they're sort of developing in tandem. What do you think?
Cool. Yeah, I mean, one side of this is I don't think the EVM is as bad as people think the EVM. I really like the EVM. It's really, I have a lot of fun building stuff on the EVM. But that's not to say there isn't room for improvement, and that's kind of like, at least for Optimism, that's like kind of the point, is trying to build our software as close to Ethereum as we possibly can, because then it means, okay, we're a couple months down the line, and we're really confident with all of our Geth code base, and now you have a whole bunch of engineers who are basically working on something that looks like Ethereum, right? And so now you're basically working on Ethereum. So it's like kind of the point to work with the EVM, because then you can direct engineering effort towards making the EVM better, and you can kind of work with people and say, listen, we have this crazy idea for how we want to make the EVM better and faster. Let's really specify it well, and let's work with people and use this network as a test bed. Like Dan was saying, use this network as a test bed for some EVM change and work with people to get tooling in place to support it. You can, in a lot of ways, like we like the EVM and we want to make the EVM better, but it's hard to make the EVM better if you're just working on something like Ethereum, because Ethereum is so ossified. It's so hard to make changes to Ethereum. But we can make changes to our code base, much more easily. So I don't know. I'm an EVM stan, and definitely for the foreseeable future, it's going to dominate, and we kind of just should do our best to make it as good as possible. So.
Yeah, and to your point of just having more engineers and more brains working on that code base, that just benefits everybody. Benefits all the other chains that use the EVM too, in fact. So yeah, that is another valuable thing about working directly with the EVM or with Geth. In fact, we've had I think 2 commits upstream directly from our engineers into the Geth code base. By we, I mean not me, but I'm just going to take credit because Harry and Lee. Small things, like very small, little edge case bugs, nothing critical. But I imagine as time goes on, L2 teams working with Geth and with the EVM, like that will kind of happen more and more. And yeah, Geth is complicated, the EVM is complicated, so more people working on it and thinking of ways to improve it is good.
Definitely. So, is there room for optimization in the process for rollups on and off L2s? Do developers and end users have the patience for the rollup process?
Sorry, I think I missed the key word in the question. Is there room for optimization?
Yeah, so is there room for optimization in the process for rollups on and off L2s?
Like for users getting on and off? Yes. I mean, this is probably, like going between chains is inevitably the most different UX part of the experience of using a rollup, just because when you're using one chain, you can't go between chains. So now we have 2 chains, or more than 2. So I think that, we're still, I don't know, there's a lot to say about like UX and stuff. And I think I even saw a Twitter thread or comment from you about like wallet UX and what needs to happen there. Basically, like, I don't want to steal your thunder here because I feel like I got some of this from you. But basically, wallets and sort of block explorers and even just like web dApp interfaces are kind of the 3 ways, vaguely speaking, that users like get a view of what's going on. And I think a similar thing has happened with all 3. Where, I mean, here we are hyping up EVM compatibility, yay, and it's great, and it is great. But what's happened is because of that, these, a lot of applications or these, wallets and stuff have said like, okay, we'll just sort of take the same user experience, take the same tooling, take the same user interface that we've used on layer 1 and just like plug it into this new chain. And on the one hand, yes, that's awesome, you can do that. On the other hand, like, there's very different UX considerations to be had there. And wallets is where like there's the most room for growth, I would say, to be nice, because you look at MetaMask, and this is where I'm just stealing your thunder, but you look at MetaMask and like the network switching that we use currently was developed for developers. Like it used to only be that you switch networks if you were using a testnet, which is something developers do, and it's gotten a bit better. MetaMask has added new features, but it's still basically that, and probably whatever the better UX is very different from that. And we could say a similar thing about explorers and even just individual user interfaces. So like long way of just saying yes, but I don't know how to do better. But I want like a smart UX designer to solve all these things.
And we can go deeper here and not steal his thunder, but what are the core UX challenges that need to be solved? And certainly the gas and speed, but are these designs and UI elements that could be are these UI things that could be upgraded?
Maybe I accidentally answered that question.
Yeah, and then we can just speak more like it's open conversation here, just basically talking about the challenges of UI and UX right now and the L2 solutions and like what can be done and how to go from here and how you're going to approach them.
Yeah, I mean, as was just said, right? All these wallets were designed when there was just one chain to be interacting with. And so now you have to start thinking about like, okay, what does the ideal user experience look like when I have more than one chain? How do I, communicate? There's like a million things you need to communicate to users. We are seeing better user experience finally come around. Like the tweet thread that I was talking about was Rainbow. Rainbow Wallet has a really nice UX where all of your assets on all of your different chains just show up in your wallet with a little logo saying which chain it's on. And I think Coinbase Wallet just came out with an update that basically follows the same UX pattern. And it's nice, right? It's like, okay, now I don't have to go, I'm not on like Ethereum and then I have to go into the settings to find some setting that the developer didn't care about because it's like this really ugly settings page that I finally find Optimism and like maybe it's not there and I have to add it manually and there's all this stuff. So, but now it's just there, right? Like all my stuff just shows up. So clear improvements coming in. I think there's some like weird, bridging is going to be an interesting one. There's like 1 million bridges right now, so I can totally imagine like wallets are just going to have bridging built in, where it's basically some UX where it's like transfer your assets to Optimism or whatever. Someone will figure it out and it'll look cool. And then I think the other interesting one is fees. Like I'm sure that if you've ever tried to build an L2, you understand that fees are super weird because on Ethereum, the way you pay fees is you have gas, and you pay for gas based on different things, computation, data, all these different things. There's a certain gas cost per operation, and it's not the most intuitive thing in the world, but after all these years, like people kind of get it. I think the problem with layer 2s is you now have the same thing on layer 2, and you are now also paying for this data that lives on layer 1. And this is like a totally new thing. And we went back and forth with all these different fee schemes of how do you represent this to users. And the best option was like, okay, let's get a hard fork into Ethereum where we introduce a new transaction type for layer 2s, which I really want to do. And we can't do that yet because getting an EIP through is like a whole process. And so what's the next best option? Just like get all the wallets, just like force them to show this new fee thing, the layer 1 fee, and that's like this separate type of fee. And there's just all this new stuff that's, it's just the wallet UX doesn't exist there just because the problem didn't exist until like 5 months ago. So it'll improve, but there's so many fronts where we can just make it easier for people to understand I'm on a layer 2, or I have these assets here and here, and I know the security properties of my assets on this chain versus on this chain. There's so much you could talk about, but
yeah.
It's crazy.
I haven't looked at I've heard about the Rainbow thing. I haven't looked at what they did there, but it seems like the basic idea of it being asset-based instead of network-based is like the first, somehow they conveyed that, where like you can look at.
Well, they'll just show you've got your Ethereum Ether, then you've got your Optimism or your Arbitrum Ether, where it'll say like Ether, and then at the bottom of this token symbol, it'll have the the network logo. But you don't have to like flick a bunch of settings just to see assets on one chain or another. It just shows up in one place.
Yeah, and with fees are like the craziest one, as you say, especially with cross-chain stuff, bridges. Because first of all, different L2s handle fees differently, inevitably, and yeah, you really just want the wallet to convey exactly what's going on. What we can't do, and which is good that we can't do, we can't sneak money past you, right? So if you will see what you're paying in your wallet, but communicating what and why is where it gets tricky. So, for example, if you're doing a cross-chain message and you're like kind of paying for execution from one layer to the other, you're doing some operation that didn't involve transferring ETH, and you're like, wait, why am I sending ETH here? And the best we can do is sort of like try to communicate that in the user interface, but then the wallet doesn't know about this. So yeah, it's almost like, we have the tools we have, but if all of our tools like burnt down and we had to rebuild them, there's like so many things we would change. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just wallets, yeah. We can get into Explorers, but yeah, we can leave it.
We can go into Explorers, yeah. Do you think there's anything, just to elaborate on this, that could be done in the near future or right now to make the adoption of L2 accelerate? Or anything that stands out to you to make any material changes?
Well, it's a tricky question because there's been some drama around this recently, for those who follow Ethereum drama, which is probably some people in this room. Where basically, yeah, there was this, for whatever reason, there was this sudden push of decreasing the cost of call data on Ethereum, and part of the purported reason being we want to accelerate adoption of rollups, subtext being we need to compete with other L1s. That's me putting in the subtext. But so that was, like Vitalik kind of put that out there. And then the Geth team recently put out a statement basically saying, no, we don't support this. Basically, meaning we don't support doing this immediately. We think this is rushed. And the reason they gave was basically like we're not ready to directly incentivize users to go to layer 2 because like layer 2s are still in their layer 2s like rollups, like Arbitrum, like Optimism, are still in their infancy. There we go. Hopefully not infamously. And specifically, and this is true, and it's just worth saying this here and wherever else we can. With Arbitrum we say mainnet beta whenever we talk about it, and that's just because we have a fully implemented system, but it has these kind of trusted guardrails on it. So they are still trusted systems at this point, and so yeah, it was a weird thing where on the one hand, at least just speaking for myself here, and certainly not for you, but also not for anyone else at Offchain Labs, the idea of decreasing call data so that rollups are more usable for users, on the one hand, I'm all for it, but I do sort of agree with the Geth team that if we're really thinking about trying to accelerate moving users onto rollups, the fact that they're still trusted is not a good look. So I'm rambling a bit because this is a bit of a tricky question, but I would say we're very aggressive about, we want projects to build on Arbitrum, we want to help them, we want to get, sort of get the ecosystem moving there. But as far as users using it, of course we want users using it, but it's just really important to make that clear that this is young tech and we still, for security reasons aren't ready to kick off the training wheels. I forgot what your question was exactly, but I think I had an answer in there somewhere.
There's a main thing to help grow adoption
for
yeah. L2s, but
so I didn't really answer it, but I just gave my thoughts
on
that.
Kelvin. No, it's all good. So do you think just more bespoke wallet solutions need to be adopted in the interim for going on L2s?
Yeah, I mean the wallets, natively integrating them will just make it easier for people to use them. Clearly centralized exchange integrations. Centralized exchanges for a lot of people are kind of like trusted bridges, for at least when it comes to moving money between chains, which is interesting. So, I think you're going to start seeing that really take off, and then it'll be easier for people to move money between one chain or another. That's still either way. There's still going to be decentralized or bridges that are cheaper. It's still going to be probably the cheapest choice to go through centralized exchanges. But anyway, there's all these different things. There's a lot of infrastructure that still needs to be put in place so that it's really easy for people to use the system. But yeah, people think the crypto space moves way faster than it actually does. The crypto world is slow and steady, with everybody just constantly being oh my god, it's so fast. I don't know what's happening, but it's just them saying that in their head all the time and not giving them a chance to actually sit down and think about what's going on. I think you're just going to see slow and steady progress when it comes to layer 2s. Optimistic rollups are way easier than ZK rollups, so I think it's going to take a while, but they're going to ramp up. It's going to be kind of a natural process. I mean, we're doing everything we can to speed it up, but yes, like Dan was saying, we need to, we have training wheels as well. There's this constant sort of balance you have to strike between wanting to sort of push the technology to other people, but also it's also really new, and we need to be careful. And there's these pressures in the Ethereum world to scale now, but we also want to scale safely. And TLDR, it's complicated. It'll probably just naturally happen as time goes on, and we're already starting to see a lot of really cool, UX improvements that make it easier to use the system. So we'll get there.
Yep, that's all for the questions. If you guys have any final comments, love to hear them. Otherwise, both of them will be up here. Instead of asking questions in the crowd, we're going to stand up here. So you're welcome to come up, ask any questions you have. Welcome to ask me any questions about Chainlink Labs. I'm on the business development team, so I just wanted to thank everybody for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Drinks and pizza, as you know, in the other room. And yeah, happy holidays, and thanks for coming.